And we're rolling.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of Accelerate. And today is an important day because we're going to be looking at maps of your communities, and then you'll have a chance to do your analysis of those maps. We'll have a worksheet that we'll hand out before you go into your breaks, and you'll be able to take a look at those maps. Shabika has prepared some maps for you, and those will be in a drive that you'll be able to access. And should be a good morning for good information. We also have folks from Geo Partners, Paul and Glenn, and they're going to talk about their system, which really links to speed tests. That can be a very powerful tool in combining both mapping and survey information. And so, Adrienne, do you want to say good morning? You caught her off surprise, maybe.
Hi, everybody.
Oh.
Finishing my breakfast, looking forward to the mapping demo, and glad you're all here. Bye.
Sorry about that. Good. Shabika, why don't you take over?
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. So I am going to start off with introducing all of us to the Illinois broadband map. I'm going to share my screen now. And I'll post a link to the map later on in the chat so that everybody has access to it. And what we're going to do basically is run through all the different tabs that this map has, and highlight a few important features that can be useful as you're using the Illinois broadband map, and we can take any questions at the end. So as you can see, this has like a lot of tabs here. Just to get us started, because we are mostly counties, so how do we just dig into our interest area starting off? So the first way could be accessing this general tab right here on the left, bottom left, and we would essentially click on the boundary-based layers, and that has the option of county boundaries. So that can get us started. The other way could be using the query tool, which is right here. So query or locate. And you can actually query by census block, census and school districts, and a lot of other options. For this demo, we'd be looking at locate by county, just to keep it simple. And we would just type the name of the county. So let's maybe go with Livingston for the purpose of this tutorial, and add. So it just zooms into this, and it gives you a snapshot of connectivity in the county. So the number of houses connected by 25 by 3, 100 by 20, and gigabit service, wireline. So that's the percentages there, just to give a quick snapshot of what it is like. And you can also adjust the transparency of this layer through this. Oh, not in the locate one maybe. So yeah, most of the time you can through these things here, adjust transparency. And the final method that you could actually use is adding data. So for the maps that I have created, I've also created a file, which is the boundary file for your counties, because we also have groups that have multiple counties. So it'd be nice if we had all of that information in one place. So let's, for this, go with a multi-county example like Ogle. So just looking up the file here. Yeah, so we have it here. It's a zip folder that you can add. You can also add CSV or KML. That's what you're comfortable with, and it adds it there. So I'm going to turn off these, and we get the boundary shape file here. So we see all of our interest area all at once. Now that we know how to get started and just zoom into our counties using various different ways on the map, let's look at the tabs that we have. Firstly, the access tab. So this has all the information about access by different speeds, 25 by 3, both fixed and wireline, and 100 by 20 and gigabit service, all of those layers. We also have access by different technology, which includes fiber. So we get to see all of that. And there is a legend at the bottom right here, which shows, what all of these colors mean. So there's cable, DSL, and fixed wireline, fixed wireless, and also mobile connection. And yeah, interactive, so we can zoom in as much as we want to, and get into the specifics of access at the address level pretty much. The other way could also be zooming into a particular address if you want to look at access there. The next tab that we have, and this also has information about the served and unserved areas. So again, by fixed and wireline. One of the layers that I'd like to highlight here is the unserved areas at 25 by 3. And what is nice about this is it also has the household density. So you can actually click on each of these individual ones and see the density of households in this unserved area at the census block level. So the exact number is 10.83. And this could give you a sense of whether it's feasible to build in this, or why are these unserved. If there's low household density, then it kind of explains why there's no build out in those areas yet. And it also shows all of these areas in the hatching that do not have any households. So that also explains why there's no access there, because it doesn't have to have wireline access in those areas. The next tab here is the statistics tab, and this has information about the demographic data that relates to broadband need and adoption statistics. So we have educational attainment, income, internet access by age, education, as race, and also information about broadband subscription. So let me go back here and turn off all of these access layers. And we can look at percentage of households with internet subscription in each of these. Again, this is at the block group level. So the number of households and all of this is up again, so you can actually see the actual numbers instead of just the percentages, which attribute to different colors on the map. So percentage of households with no internet subscription or access, and the density of households with no internet subscription. Again, density could be a good planning factor there. The next thing that I would like to highlight here is the draw tool, which I usually like to, zoom into things and see why, just pick up some interest areas. So I would go back to access, turn off all my layers here, back to access, turn on my county layer, and maybe want to look at a few unserved areas. So I also want to get a sense of places. So I would turn on this layer right here in the boundaries field, which is township, cities, and villages. It's probably taking a while to load. Oh, it's not checked. Yeah. Yeah. So now I can zoom in and see all of these townships, and the villages are in these purple shades, and the brown ones represent cities here. So I can actually look at the bigger, incorporated villages and cities and see access in those. And if I want to highlight a few, interest areas, so I see that the city right here, which is Rochelle here, does not have access in this spot. So maybe just highlight a few areas here that I'm interested to look at using the draw tool. So maybe this. And also I see that this village right here does not have access. So I could just add a marker here. And just for example, so using these two. And now essentially, if I want to compare it to the statistics layer, I could turn this off again and look at probably income. Is income a factor for why there's no access in these areas? So in this level, we see the income's not too bad. The median income is 65,000. And in the other one, it's 48,000. So we don't really see a pattern for no access with income. But just to compare variables and see why certain areas might have access and why certain areas do not have access. So consistently, this comes out to be percentage of population 25 years and over whose highest education completed is less than high school. So that number is higher again in this southern city place that we highlighted, and it's pretty less in this area. And the pop-up to see more information. Yeah. And this could just be a good tool to also highlight certain areas that you would like to share within your team. And you can then go ahead and export the map using this feature here. And again, heavy layers, so it might take a while, and a good internet connection is probably needed when using the map because yeah, it does take up quite a little bandwidth there. So yeah, but then there's this export feature which usually loads up, and there are different formats that you can export it into, a PDF, an image, whatever works that way. Or the other way could be using the share tool here if you want to share it digitally, again, without like in the application itself. So there are certain options here. You can actually select remember layers visibility. So like all the layers that we have turned on right now, except for the layers that I exported in, those are going to be visible when I share it. You can also add markers again to the map when you're sharing it. And yeah, and then it gives you a code, and that is what you can share. So that is another feature that I wanted to highlight. The next tab here on the top left is the grant eligibility. So we had created this for all the necessary information and eligibility layers for our Connect Illinois Round 3 eligible areas, but that is on hold right now. But you can these layers can always be helpful. So it has got the federal funding layers here, again, going back to the legend and saying what all this means, 100% grant in green. And we also have the RDOF layer here, which is pretty interesting, and it affects how certain areas might and might not be eligible. So this is also updated as of March 2022, with the green ones showing the authorized areas and the red ones, the dark red ones, showing the defaulted areas. So that could also be information, and that this map is also included in the maps that I've created for all of you. So we'll have that information there. Okay. And one of the other most important features of the map is the internet service provider locator. So what you can essentially do is like type in an address if you have one specific to if you want to know the different providers in your location, or just use a pin to find out any of the areas that you're interested in. I'm going to draw it here and say Frankfurt, and it's going to give me a list of all the providers available. So we have urban communications here, and the type of technology that they provide, and the maximum upload and download speeds. Again, we know that this information might not be the most comprehensive at times. So we have the feedback option here. So you can just click on this link right here, and it takes you to a form where you can provide the reason for your feedback. So no broadband at this location. In reality, speed issues present, pricing issues present, or any other issues. So you can provide all of that with specific address information. And you can also directly locate it on the map and share it with us. So we will make sure in the next mapping when we're updating this, we take into consideration all of this feedback and ensure that, it's rectified. So we highly encourage you to use that feedback option if you see any issues with how the data is represented for your specific location. So far we've gone through all of these tabs here on the top left. The bottom here, we looked at the boundary layers. In addition to that, we also have a lot of layers about the anchor institutions. We have libraries, populates. So we have one right here, show up for the entire state. And similarly, we have healthcare facilities, public safety facilities, universities, and schools. So that can also be to identify any of these anchor institutions in your respective communities. Then we have the federal funding tab here. Again, a very comprehensive list of all the federal funding, all the federal funding programs that we have, and you can select each of these individually and look it up. So there's ACAM that I've selected right now. Okay, yeah. So you want to make sure that, the first layer right here is also checked so that it shows up on the map. We have the legend again, and yeah, zoom into your specific county or just, get a broader sense of where we're at. So again, if we want to go back to Ogle County that we had here, we can just zoom to that. And we can see all the different federal funds distributed in the Ogle County and partners areas. So all of that. Then we also have the state projects tab here. We'll go ahead and turn these layers off.
This is George. I have a question. So
Sure.
You said federal funds distributed. Is there some type of graphic that we can look at that would indicate our specific region of what would be available? If that makes sense, is what different grants would our area be available?
Sure. So, we do have that for the state with the grant eligibility tab. So we had this layer of round 3 eligibility right here. So we have that for the state grant, but we do not really have that for the federal funding options.
And the color and the color coding is to the right.
Yeah.
So anything that, if I'm reading this correctly, that everything that's in red or pink is lacking wireless, prior state grants, and reconnect program areas. So if just so I'm in my minimalist thinking, those areas would meet the criteria to go after some type of state grant. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, that's right. And this was specifically created for the Connect Illinois Round 3 program. So yes, any of the areas here in red are actually eligible for the Connect Illinois Round 3 funding by the state. Thank you for your question.
And I just want to follow up that our next speakers in their system have a lot of those program criteria built into their system. And so they'll be able to show that kind of eligibility by geography for many programs. Thanks, Shabika.
Thank you for adding that, Bill. Now moving on to this tab right here on the right. So we have the speed test link here. And again, it's as easy. A lot of us have taken speed tests by now. Just click on it and it takes you to the speed test link. And for some reason, oh wait, did I click the wrong link? I clicked the wrong link. So yeah, there's basically, I clicked on the Illinois Broadband Lab. So yeah, that's where it took me. So you can go to the Illinois Broadband Lab, and this is where the static maps are housed. So all of the maps for the different speeds can be found here in mapping onto static maps. And this is all by county. So you can download any maps that you'd want to look up, but then we also have provided these to you as part of the maps that I've created in the Google Drive folders that'll be available to all. And you can also download the coverage shape files through this link here if you want to like work on all of this data in GIS. So it takes you there and it's a zipped folder and you'll get access to the shape files here and the speed test. So you'll essentially have to click here and this takes you to speedtest.net and just click on go and it's gonna start your speed test and just takes a while. And it's gonna be stored in Ookla and eventually we're hoping to acquire this data and populate it as well. So again, we would encourage that people start using this so that we have good data to actually add to our map. Yes, and we also have a few different tabs here on adoption and funding, a few different links, not the most comprehensive list, but again, something worth exploring for resources on adoption and funding. And an about tab, which has some information about the data collection. So as we discussed in the last meeting, this data is latest as of November 30, 2021. And it excludes mobile and satellite services, as we have already seen, because this includes fixed and wireline services only. And again, the link to the broadband lab where we have the static maps. So yes, that is about the broadband map. And I would just like to share the different things that are included in the maps and data that I've created. So for example, we have all of the maps on axis by different technology, speeds, and unserved areas. So I've put together a presentation also with the maps and highlighted a few areas that might be of interest. Again, we know the accuracies and inaccuracies with broadband mapping. So this could essentially be a good start. And there are definitely places that you might know of based on your personal experience. So this is one of the resources that we have created. And the other thing is the census data that we have for different counties. So I'm going to pull that up. So the first one here, this is by places in your specific counties, and it is by age, race, educational attainment, and employment status. And it gives you the total for all of these. And then there's breakup on, a population that has a computer with a broadband subscription in percentages, and with a computer without an internet subscription, with no computer in the household, and so on for all the different places in your counties. So again, this is directly from census, and again, could be a good start in identifying some of those areas which need attention. So that was one of the tables. And the second one that we have is so this one is for types of computers that households have, the type of internet subscriptions, and the household income, and how that relates to what type of connection they have, or whether they have a connection or not. So again, this is from the census and could be a good starting point for understanding the places in your counties that need specific attention. So that is the other thing. And yes, so that sums up all that we have for mapping. If we have any questions, I can take them now.
Shabika, that last data table you showed, that's
Yeah.
available by county as well, correct? For the countywide data?
So I do not have that by county yet. I can add that.
Okay, that would be great. But this
Okay.
is super, because we think of rural counties and kind of the county is the same, but I think we do see that great variation from place to place within a county. And so I think that's important to recognize. And even people who live in the county might not realize that level of differentiation from place to place.
Mhm.
Good. Any questions for Shabika? Shabika,
Bill, this
so
is George Evans. Bill, it's George. I do have a question.
oh, good.
Shabika, you're with the Illinois Office of Broadband, is that correct?
Yes.
At some time in the future, if we continue to move the ball down the field, would you be available for individualized presentations if we would get our county governments together in the future? Is that something
Sure.
that's provided
I'm
by
happy
your
to
office?
work with you on that. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And
Bill,
obviously,
does everybody know where these folders are residing? So when we go into the breakout room, they can be accessed?
yeah,
That might-
Shabika's
Yeah.
going to put them in the chat.
Thank you.
And Shabika does a great job of showing, this is an incredibly powerful tool, and going through it in 20 minutes is not easy. And I like she, does a great job of doing it, but I encourage people to take a look at this and then play around with it. You can't break it. So, and then again, Shabika is available to work with your counties, with your group, to look in more detail at the data and look at those data sets and so on. She's super good at explaining it. Any other questions? Okay, well, Shabika will put that links in the chat for you, and also her contact information, and you'll have that then to make direct contact with her. Thanks, Shabika. Nice job.
Thank you, Bill.
Next up, we have Glenn and Paul Deming and Glenn Fishbein. They're from Geo Partners, and they're a private consulting firm that is in Minnesota, and has a unique way of looking at speed test data. And that's what they're really going to focus on today. And one of the shortcomings of the Illinois speed test there that Shabika showed is right now you can't really get the data out as a group for your county. And so Paul's and Glenn have a tool that allows that, and allows some specific mapping of those results. So it's an alternative. As you think about next week, we'll be talking about surveys, and we encourage you to include a speed test link in your survey. And if you just include a link like to the speed test, you're going to ask the survey respondents to write in their results into the survey itself, so you can gather that information. With the Geo Partners tool, that data would be collected automatically. Of course, there is a fee for that. So, but we'll hear more about that as we go here, and really want to welcome Paul and Glenn to our meeting today. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Bill. Excuse me. Thank you, everyone. Out of respect for time, I'm just going to turn this over to Glenn Fishbein, who is the creator of this software. And with that, Glenn, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
He's muted.
Glenn, are you on mute?
I think I'm off mute. Am I off mute?
There you go.
Okay. So what we're showing you today is a software product developed by Breaking Point Solutions, LLC, which is marketed by Geo Partners. And the purpose of what we're doing here is not so much to create a map, although we do create maps, and we have many of the same layers that you were just seeing. The purpose of this is to get the money. And there's 3 pots of money that we're going for when we have this type of mapping occurring. The first pot of money is the money that is allocated for subsidies for low-income individuals. The second pot of money is the middle mile infrastructure. And the third pot of money is the connectivity to individual households. I'm going to show you how we go about addressing each of those 3 different pots of money, and how to set up a structure whereby you can determine the grant viability and technology appropriate for an area that you may want to consider for a broadband grant application. Now, what you're seeing here is the result of speed tests. Each one of those dots represents the actual rooftop location of the house where a test was taken. The range of data that you see in the left-hand side, this is basically totally a variable. You can change this as needed depending upon the grant application group that you're looking at. There's a lot of other functionality in here. I'll just briefly show you that there's a lot of stuff here. We can take a look at, for example, where ISP service areas are. We can take a look at a number of different functionalities, such as federal protected areas, legislative districts, school districts, et cetera, et cetera. We can look at where fiber is. We can look at income. We can look at costing information. Give you a quick example of that. This is currently showing, say, the download speeds, and with the click of a button, I can show you the costs that people are paying per month for the services that they have. So there's a lot of capability here, but I'm just going to focus on money, because at the end of the day, you need money to solve the problems that you have. So the first part of the money is the availability of broadband to people who can't afford it. Now, one of the things that we capture that's not normally captured by other speed testing programs is households that have no service. If you do not have service, you cannot take a speed test. So what we've done in our crowdsourcing process is we go that extra mile to start collecting households that have no service. So for example, if we're looking at a summary of this county, what we can see is that we had no service reports from 25% of our respondents. These are people who could not take a speed test. So, and that's a significant element there, because now that allows us to focus on no service or unserved households, because that's one of the focuses on the NTIA program moving forward. So now the question is, why don't they have service? So we'll take a look. We've got two areas here, this one up here and this one over here, which are showing a large proportion of those, excuse me, no services. So if we zoom into this area and we start saying, well, there's something weird going on here. We've got no services and we have services. What's happening? So we take a look here at that particular test, and we see that that's Charter Communications with 114 meg down at $65 a month. That's pretty good. Here's another Charter Communications at 71 meg down, no cost information. Here's another Charter Communications at 77 meg down. So this is not an unserved area requiring deployment. Every one of these black dots is a household that has no broadband. And reasons why they don't have broadband are captured in their testing results. But the basic issue here is that the most common issue in an area like this is they can't afford it. So this points to the first pot of money. Where should I emphasize getting awareness that there are federal subsidies, and getting the ISPs themselves who are receiving those federal subsidies to make sure that they've got the public outreach to get to those households and get them some broadband? Or perhaps you don't have the educational resources on the ground, so you may want to come up with digital literacy programs for an area such as this. So that's one of the things that this type of mapping technology can bring to you, is access to those people who are what we would call in part of the digital inequity problem. Now, the second pot of money has to deal with what we would call middle mile infrastructure. Whenever we move into a target area, one of the first things that we do is we beg the local ISPs and local communities to give us their fiber routes so that we can start looking at how those are distributed for future deployment projects. So when we get that information, then we can just map it. So those blue lines are available fiber. So if I'm pretending that this is going to be a deployment project, well, I'm in luck because I got fiber running right through the center of this community. So I can branch off of that fiber and expand my services up to this area. I don't have a middle mile problem here. But if I'm looking at this area here, my fiber, nearest fiber is up here. I don't have the middle mile necessary to bring broadband into this area that has no service. So the first part of the costing element we have here for your middle mile grant applications is to identify where the fiber is and identify where you want it to be. So we have a middle mile project that has to go from here to here in order to start a deployment program in this area. So we can very quickly find out how much is that going to cost. If I'm going to connect those 2 points where the fiber is up here to where the fiber needs to be down here, If I'm going to run a fiber line down there, that's 4.02 miles of fiber that I have to run along that little purple line there, which is the shortest possible roadway that I can follow. So that'll give me a sense at that level then as to how much it's going to cost me to apply for a grant, or how much my grant application has to ask for. So if I know that my fiber cost per mile is $100,000, I need at least $400,000 to run the fiber, the middle mile fiber, down to where I need it to be. We also give you a look at an alternative, which is also a point-to-point fixed wireless. So at this point up here, we're going to basically say we could put up an 80-foot telephone pole with an antenna and a radio. And over here, we could put up another 80-foot telephone pole with an antenna and a radio. And this line here, if it's green, it says I've got clean line of sight. So I could actually do that. And each of those telephone poles with radios and associated equipment is going to send me back $35,000. So for $70,000, if I don't want the fiber infrastructure longevity, I can put up a very decent, say, 800 megabit symmetric link between these two locations, and I'll solve my middle mile problem that way. So it gives you choices as to how you can think about what type of grant application you want to do for your middle mile services. So that's the second aspect about how we go about finding money. Now, the third one is, okay, so I know how to get my fiber. I know that this is not an area of deployment. I don't see any quality services in here except for that little green dot, which is a cell phone from Verizon Wireless. So this area needs some help. So how am I going to figure out how much that's going to cost? So we can basically outline the project area manually and basically say, all right, I know that I need broadband in this area. How much is it going to cost? Because if I'm going to write a grant, one of the first things I have to put in the grant application is how much money am I asking for. So we can basically close off that area. And now we're into a mode where I'm saying, what type of technology do I want to put into this area? Well, everybody wants fiber to the home. So what we'll basically do is we'll basically say this is going to be a fiber to the home project. It'll take a while to explain these parameters, but we'll say that the blended cost per mile of fiber is $72,000 in this example. It's going to vary depending upon where you are in the state, where you are in the county. This is information that is relatively easy to get out of the ISPs or your local power company. And that number is critical because that's core to the costing of a project. But once you have that number goes in here. And if I want this to be fiber to the home for everybody, I'm going to adjust some parameters here, which basically tell the system that this is a fiber to the home only project. And now the question is, how much coverage can I get? Well, I'm going for 264 households, and how much is it going to cost? So the system is going to be using some standard bill of material content from, in this example, Calyx as the networking provider. And the cost will come out here that I can cover 100% of the households for $4.6 million. Okay, that's interesting. And here's the other element. It's not very competitive as a grant, at least by federal standards. Now we have additional detail we can take a look at as to what this all means. So sitting back here, we're saying, okay, by the FCC 100 by 20 rule, this is an eligible area. 90% of the households don't have adequate broadband. So yeah, it's eligible. I can apply for a grant. In terms of the fiber, I'm going to have to run 50 miles of fiber in order to connect every household. The fiber plant is going to be $3.6 million. The associated networking equipment is going to be $205,000. And we throw on a 20% project management fee, come to a total of $4.6 million. That's how much it's going to cost. Our $17,000 per household. Now, in terms of the grant competitiveness, these are the factors that have been used in Objective, USDA, and other programs to determine grant eligibility. So, for example, how many farms, how many education facilities, how many medical facilities, how many other critical infrastructure facilities are there? How many of these households are in opportunity zones or severely economically distressed areas, which are these three measures here? Is it tribal? Is it rural? And basically, that result for this area is it doesn't meet very many of these criteria. It's probably not eligible for a federal grant. I mean, it may be eligible, but it's not going to be as competitive as an area that has a high poverty level or a tribal area or is truly defined as rural by current standards of rurality. So what do I do now? Well, I'm probably not going to get a grant. for $4.6 million because it's not very competitive, and I'm going to have a lot of grant applications coming out for that money. So let's try a different network technology. But instead of saying it's fiber to the home, let's consider the idea that this is going to be a fixed wireless project. So in that case, we can force the system to say, okay, it's not going to be fiber. And then we choose a wireless technology that's, say, NTIA compliant, 100 by 20. So what's the cost and coverage in that case? So we take a look at that model, and it gets these results. We can cover 69% of the households for about $160,000. Well, why 69%? Because the terrain here sucks. There's a lot of hills and valleys, and not every household is going to be in the right location to see a radio signal. But we take a look at how that works out. We've got $867 per household. It may be worth to try this as just a starter project for the local citizens who could probably afford to do that on their own, or a light subsidized grant from, say, state or foundation. Again, it's not going to be a good federal candidate, but you can start getting something into that area for a relatively low price. And then we have the option, maybe I could put in some fiber and some fixed wireless. So we can rerun the model again. And in this case, what we'll do is we'll basically leave the parameters defined as is. And we're going to basically say, okay, some of this is going to be fiber. Some of this is going to be fixed wireless. How does that look? So we submit again. We come back with an answer that says, I can cover 76% of the households for $600,000. And how does that break out? Well, that says I'm going to have 62 fiber households, and I'm going to try to cover 203 with fixed wireless. And then my cost per household is $3,000. So what can I do here? Well, this now is getting interesting. This may not be a normal BEAD grant from NTIA. This could now become a Community Connect grant from USDA, because Community Connect is looking for projects under $3 million, and they want to find unserved, no service households in the program. So this can not only direct you to how competitive you are, but what type of grant you might want to be doing. And there's one other interesting thing that occurs as you're doing this. Every time you run one of these studies, it gets stored in a database and you can retrieve it on demand. So if I need to go back, if I've got a grant sitting in front of me, it just came out, it's got criteria, I can download my database of stored studies, and I can use something like Excel to filter to the top the ones that have the most likely probability of winning that application. And then for my infinite resources called grant writers, of which you always have a shortage, I can direct their attention to doing the grant application for only those projects that have the highest probability of getting a win. Now, there's a lot of other content in here, but I think the key factor of everything that we're trying to do these days is we're trying to get to the money. And the biggest pot of money, that $40-odd billion out there, is directed to the three programs that we discussed, the low-income subsidies, the middle mile, and the deployments. So the purpose of all of our mapping efforts is to get you to the point where you can actually compete for those dollars and move forward. Now, I know that Illinois has its own program. If we had understanding of that, we would add those elements into the system as other competitive points that would be specific to Illinois and their program. But at the moment, we haven't had that type of interaction. So that's a quick summary of what we do and how we do it. There's about 2 hours of training to see everything that goes into this, but we promise, Bill, we'd let you folks have some free time today. Any questions?
Any questions for the Geo Partners folks?
Yeah, if you don't mind me asking, as far as your services go, is that billed as by the hour or a project, or is it a percentage of grant money, or how does that work?
No, I'd love to be a percentage of grant money, but basically what it is there's a base fee for either a state or a county, and then a price per occupied household. So it's a variable. Basically, if you're a small population county, you have a low price. If you're a high population county, you have a higher price. If you're a state, instead of selling by the county, then we would sell it by the state, and we discount that dramatically. because the primary issue that we have in maintaining and supporting these systems is the number of training sessions we have to go through. Now, we don't do the analysis I just showed you. We train you how to do it so that you can generate hundreds of these studies for whatever county or district or state that you're operating in. Our objective is to get you in control of the data and in control of your grant application process.
Is the state engaged in a conversation with you to purchase your service, or is it being left up to the counties?
At the moment, okay, I would say when we cover an entire state, there are two paths to that. One is direct discussion with the state. At this time, we've not had any substantive discussions with the state. The second path, which is actually of equal consequence, or about half of our statewide customers, is economic development districts band together and get the state price without necessarily involving the state. Now, that depends upon how advanced the state broadband office is. If it's a new office, it's difficult for them to get into the type of funding mode that they need. So often the economic development districts will take up the slack until such time as the broadband office is fully operational. We generally, don't recommend that you do it on a county by county basis because that's the most expensive path. But there are cases where we do individual counties within states.
Will you do regional areas that would include multiple counties?
Yes, we can do that. It's a little bit more difficult to do that from our perspective. We prefer not to do that, but we've done some pretty wacko stuff in the past. I'll give you an example for Delta Regional Authority, which is it's a mess in terms of a regional aspect. Show you what that looks like. So Delta Regional Authority is a federal agency that is responsible for services throughout parts of multiple states. So when you're talking about a regional solution, this is an example of what we have done in the past and can consider in the future. But it's pretty time consuming for us. So what you'll see here on this particular map is we've got all of Louisiana, and then we got parts of Alabama, parts of Mississippi, parts of Arkansas, parts of Missouri. We actually have, I think it's a little bit of Illinois in there. HOJK. Yeah, we've got some counties already in Illinois that haven't taken advantage of this yet. We're trying to get the Delta Regional Authority trained in. They're going through transitions. So technically, we are covering these parts of Illinois, these counties right now, and also Kentucky and parts of Tennessee. So yeah, we can do regional consideration. And if your county is in one of the Delta Regional Authority areas, then you are technically capable of doing this today, subject to the training that we've been trying to get DRA to accept.
Do you often find yourself contracting with private vendors? So many of the ISPs do similar types of studies or documentation?
We'd very rarely is any of our customer an ISP. The objective of everything that we do is to put this in the hands of the local community decision makers. I mean, even if we do a statewide program, we're talking to either an economic development district or a county 90% of the time. And the key thing that we want to do is we want to be objective. So we do not want to have a favorite ISP, a favorite technology. We want this to be information that the community itself can use to apply for money. We'll tell you which ISPs are in the area. That just falls out of the data collection process. But we will not generally work directly with an ISP.
Glenn, don't you also show existing towers if you draw an area around not only the fiber, but also where there are existing towers or high points?
We have that as a data set. In this particular context, we don't go to the full design study mode that we do with our rapid design product, or what we call geo design. In that system, yes, we do that. But in this modeling here, we're just trying to give you a quick cut of what are your options in terms of grant applications. And we're not giving you a full design, but we are giving you a very, very credible and balanced costing view. So for example, when we do a particular study here, the project cost here for the RF plant, I can tell just by the numbers, there's 2 towers involved there. I don't know where they are until I go into the other design system, which is a separate product.
Good. So if you would like Glenn and Paul or Paul to come into your breakout session and talk more about their product and how it might work for your county, why don't you put that in the chat, and they'll come around and visit if you want, and or you can make contact with them. I expect they'll put their contact information in the chat, and I can certainly provide that as well if people want it. But you know, there's we've seen them do this work in other places, including Mercer County and in Greene County, and people have been pretty excited with the work, and so it's a interesting part if you want to add that to the survey. We actually swapped our 2 weeks around, putting the survey next week rather than this week, to allow you to think about how that speed test data can be harvested and used. So looks like you guys have a lot of dates there. You can see with Livingston, Bond, and Kaskaskia. And so
Can I
that's
ask a
in
question?
Peoria. So
Can I ask a question? I don't want us to get too far off track because I know we have an agenda, but when I listened to the recording from Minnesota, there was a part of the discussion that talked about RDOF, claimed RDOF territory. And so we have a lot of area in Peoria County, and I'm assuming it's true in Woodford too, that has been claimed for RDOF, but I'm not sure that the company is able to serve the areas that have been claimed. So how do we, I mean, we didn't talk about this, but that was one of the things that was talked about in their presentation in Minnesota, that you need to debate or you need to document that that service is not there. Am I going into the weeds, or does that make sense in terms of?
Oh, we have all the RDOF content. Now, that's basically RDOF content that either has been approved by the FCC or not yet rejected. When we talk about the Minnesota context and companies such as LTD Broadband, there's a lot of, I guess I would call it politics, but until the FCC makes final determinations, we report those RDOF areas as currently taken. Some states ignore RDOF completely for the grant applications. Some ignore it if the deployment is not scheduled within a particular yearly timeframe, and some basically treat it as gold unfundable areas. I don't know what the Illinois rules are, but the RDOF data is part of what we provide.
and Illinois does not recognize the RDOF as a barrier to funding. So the state can still fund projects that are claimed with RDOF. And so that's, but like the USD, the federal dollars have to respect the RDOF boundaries. And so that's until those companies are disqualified, that is something that is in place. In Minnesota right now, there is and several states have done this. They've essentially either rejected company, we'll just use LTD as an example, did not give them ETC, which is eligible telecommunications companies, did not give them that status to provide phone service. Iowa is one of those. Minnesota had given them that status, but now there's going to be a hearing as to whether they should reject them now to pull that status. And so I'm not sure. I think in Illinois they are at ETC, but that would be an option for communities enforced to make that claim to bring this claim. And in Minnesota, it's actually the people bringing the petition to our Public Service Commission is a collaboration of the electric co-ops and the Minnesota Telecom Alliance, which are the telephone companies. So that is a separate battle, but I think it's important when you look at these maps to look at those areas where funding has been committed or is pending with the FCC and so on. So just as a side note to that, I saw an article this week that a fixed wireless company now has successfully tested a fixed wireless system using newly available spectrum on a test basis, where it was a gigabit up or download and 500 megabits upload using some newly available spectrum. So it's going to be a very interesting battle here around these RDOF dollars and this new fixed wireless technology. To be able to do it with one radio at one end and one with another is a little different than actively deploying it as well. So, but with that, I want to thank Paul and Glenn for joining us today, and we're going to go into our breakout room soon. But I just wanted to share my screen and show you this worksheet that Shabika has put in the chat, available for download. And just to go through this quickly, it's just some discussion questions for you. Your reaction to your broadband maps, the coverage, the accuracy, any surprises? What do the maps say in terms of your regional broadband competitiveness? When you look around and look at the state map and you see areas that are well covered, well served, and you're not, what does that mean in terms of the urgency of getting better broadband? What are the best deployment opportunities? I really like that map that Shabika showed with the density of unserved areas, where the darker the color, the more people in that area. Those are kind of the low-hanging fruit for deployment. Those places with very low population densities, as the GeoPartners mapping was showing, maybe some kind of hybrid fiber wireless network would be your best opportunity in the short term. Who's most difficult to serve? As we think about your provider interviews coming up, what questions you want to ask, your providers based on those maps and so on. So just a good discussion guide for you to look when you look at those maps and you start to think about what it means for your community. This is a great way to get this discussion going for your area.
Hey, Bill, there's a good question from John in Livingston County in the chat, and also from Mark about fixed wireless.
Well, I think, John, doing this yourself is one thing. Getting assistance to do it from vendors, appropriate providers is another. This is just an opportunity, in a relatively low cost one, I think you'll find, to integrate this speed test into your survey. And so I think that from my point of view, having this kind of tool in your hands can help you really do this yourself. I think Glenn talked about the training that they offer, that you can really in-depth look at the things within your area. That's really just for your, this is an option for you. It's far and short of going out and just hiring a consultant to do your study, but this is a tool that you could access that would help you do your own analysis. In question of the state, the fixed wireless, I think the state requires that they have to be able to do 100 by 100. And so they do, I think they do say that they would offer fixed wireless when it meets that requirement. That's to Mark. But I'm gonna check right back in and see about that to make sure I'm giving you the right information there, Mark. Good. Any questions, additional questions? Good. And maybe, so yeah, we're going to go into our breakout rooms. Has everyone had the ability to download the packet of maps or the worksheet? You'll have the ability to share your screens, whoever's coordinating the discussion, so that everyone, if you're not in the same room, can look at the same maps at the same time. So good. Thank you, everyone. We're going to come back at 10:20 just for a little quick discussion summary of what you've learned about the maps. And so take your time. We've got ample time to look at those, and then we'll come back at 10:20 and discuss kind of what people had, any questions you have, and so on, any additional information you're looking for. Let's have Bond County. What were some of your findings? We just did over a minute or two. What did you talk about in Bond County?
Yes.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, well, we discussed that we think we need to do some adjustments to the maps, that it's inaccurate in areas that providers say they have this, but it's not really there when homes try to use it, or it's not at the speed that they said. I didn't write all the questions down. We did look at some of our areas. We're a very rural county. So we have lots of farms, and then you have that area in the middle where it's all tree and hilly. Thinking that we're going to have to do a mix for sure to be able to get broadband out there. We're thinking maybe focus on the middle mile idea, and then maybe some wireless effort to cover our hilly and swampy regions, which obviously would be our most difficult areas to serve. We had a discussion on if we could get our wireless to give us a more accurate idea of download and upload by telling us what from 3 miles out instead of their close range. So that's going to be a work on us to reach out to those providers and see if they'll give us that kind of information or not.
Yep, very little competition in the county.
Oh, and we did discuss that. We have very little competition in our area because we are so rural that not a whole lot of people jumping in going, yes, I want to come.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Excuse me. How about in Peoria, Woodford?
I can hop on. We talked a lot about just how much work there is need to do. Obviously, it's very evident the places that don't have access that are underserved right now. We talked a lot about the fact that affordability is going to be a big piece of our focus as well, as long as the access and just kind of those discussions. We had a few questions about like who owns that fiber there, who owns that specific technology. So we discussed that a feasibility study could possibly be a solution to finding out all those pieces and answering a lot of our questions. But it was pretty evident that there is a lot of work to be done. And so that was kind of our conclusion after looking at the maps, is that there's a lot of underserved areas that need some focus.
Okay, good, thank you. Kankakee?
I would say we focused mostly on the unserved areas. So we've got kind of an east and west unserved area outside of the urban area within our county. And even, I think everybody's going to share the same concerns with availability of affordable broadband. I mean, we're hearing numbers at like $185 to get fixed wireless, and that could be problematic for people. So you have a combination of areas that are just flatly not served within our community, and then areas that are claiming to be served, but maybe not as quickly or not as affordably as we would like to see going forward.
Okay, thanks. How about Kaskaskia?
Yeah, I think we echo a lot of everyone else's sentiments. We have a lot of questions, a lot of providers we need to reach out to. There's a community to the east of us that has gig fiber right up to the county and then a little bit into it. So we need to reach out to them and figure out what there's certain hot spots that seem to have good service, but then the rest of it has absolutely nothing. So we need to try and even that out.
Okay, good. And provider interviews, that's in, we've got that on our calendar in 2 weeks. We'll talk about that. We've got a guide, interview guide for interviewing those providers, both existing and prospective ones. Let's go to Ogle County.
We actually learned about the orange and white poles, what a coyote is, and then if there's liens on poles. So an interesting piece there that I didn't have an understanding of. We're sort of like Bond County, that we're rural and it's sort of unknown what's available to us. So we have a lot of learning yet to do in regards to recognizing our underserved areas. Probably the largest piece that we have right now.
Okay, thank you. What's a coyote?
Coyote is the box that sits on the line by the telephone pole.
Acting point.
Oh,
Yes.
never heard that. Okay, good, thank you. And in Illinois, right-of-way is a huge issue. Easements and right-of-ways, which is a real barrier to broadband deployment in your state.
Yes.
Good, Livingston?
I mean, we basically covered the exact same thing everybody else is talking about. We have a really large expanse of rural that we have to get to. So our conversations have started with, how do you get fiber to these locations? It's just not feasible dollar-wise to lay fiber down to a community of 50 houses. So we're looking at, what does a wireless puddle jumping solution look like? But then obviously we've got some elevation challenges. I'm not poo-pooing the map. I think it's fantastic, but I'm questioning some of the data. We've got a couple of fiber, companies in town that aren't represented on here. Maybe, my personal question is, does the map only represent residential services? Or is this business grade, services also associated with this? I'll just stop there. So we talked through a bunch of different kind of layouts, but we're just getting our feet wet in this.
Okay, thank you. Did I hit everyone?
Yeah, you did,
Good,
Bill,
thank
but I
you.
think that's an interesting question for Shubika. Is the map only doing households or at least the ones that were presented? Because I did see the anchor institution layer that we could have given them. But how about the rest of it, say business or government buildings?
I think it's really residential service.
I think it is too, right?
Yes.
Because you get a gigabit to a business, but but not anything else. So next week we're going to be talking about surveys. And so I encourage you to dig into your maps a little bit and over this next week, but then really take a look at the survey information that Nancy has already given you, because we really want to be able to hit the ground running on these surveys and launch them in weeks rather than months. It's really important to get the surveys out so we can get the data back in and you actually use that in your planning in the final weeks of this program. And so I really appreciate everyone's diligence on that. If you have questions about the survey, Nancy is your main point of contact for the surveys. And so she's the expert there, so rely on her for that and so on. Nancy's talking about right-of-way right in the chat there about webinars that she's already hosted on this topic, in particular with railways. And you can see one coming up with the Farm Bureau and so on, with more right-of-way information coming up in the June 16th. So I encourage you to really think about that. And of course, Nancy always records these webinars, so always available for your viewing pleasure. Thank you. Look for an email with the recording for this session and links for everything and everything that we talk about. That Nancy does a great job in helping to assemble. And we'll send out we'll include the webinar link for next week as well for the around surveys. Adrienne or Nancy, anything else that we need to hit?
I don't think so. Thank you to our presenters, to Shabika, and to Glenn and Paul, if you're still on, from Breaking Point Solutions. I appreciate that you came into the various rooms and talked about your pricing to everybody, at least the one I was in, so I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to next week, Bill, on the surveys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Adrienne, could you stay on?